Hi, friends. This episode of Big Blue Banter is brought to you by PrizePicks. Head on over to PrizePicks and use promo code BANTER, and they'll match up to $100 on a new deposit. Thank you and enjoy.
Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, and today we got a special guest. It's been a long time coming. I think everyone who listens to our podcast knows him because I've heard, I can't even tell you how many times throughout the last 2-3 draft seasons, we need to get him on, we need to get him on, we need to get him on, and we finally got him on, and I'm so excited for this. And this is not on Matt, this is on us. It's the first time I asked him, and he said yes immediately, so I was very excited. And it's Matt Waldman of the RSP, the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. And I know you get asked to do this on every show. I literally was just on a show with you where you were asked to do this. So I'll modify the question a bit, but not everyone knows. So we're doing it again. Can you give us a quick elevator pitch? Maybe say we're only going to floor 10 on what the RSP is. And if you want to go longer, you could, but I know you get asked this all the time. So I want to try to be cognizant of that.
Hey, no, I appreciate that you asked me to describe it because, I mean, it's how I make my living. It is a draft guide devoted specifically to quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. It is kind of like a choose your own adventure with scouting because what I do is the PDF format that's bookmarked to the hilt because it's 1,183 pages in length. And you look at that and some people, it'll scare the bejesus out of them that's something that's in depth. But really, I take you through my process. It's very transparent and rooted in best practices that I gleaned from another career life in operations and quality management, and applied that to actually scouting football players. And the RSP has become one of the two most purchased independent draft guides, according to college recruiters like Alex Brown, who works at Ole Miss and has worked at Houston, Rice, and recently was a recruiting director at SMU. So he meets with these scouts and evaluators on a regular basis and knows the two publications that they purchase the most. And RSP is one of those. And it's also written by a guy who's been a fantasy writer since 2003. I'm a senior staff writer at Football Guys. So I give you real football. And it's one that, has been used to consult with quarterback coaches around the league, that who work with guys like Brock Purdy and Anthony Richardson and a little bit with Caleb and guys like that. But it's also something where everybody knows I don't do fantasy. So I give you a fantasy slant too. So you get a pre-draft that's really like the scouting reports, how I do my process, everything's tiered. You get the simple executive summary charts too. So if you don't want to read all that, and you want to feel like you got a good idea of it in 15 minutes, you get that. If you want to spend countless hours, you can do that. And then there's a post-draft 1 week after the draft that I send out to subscribers, and it comes basically with a tiered cheat sheet and these values that I do that kind of help you determine the sweet spot. So if I tell you that I liked Patrick Mahomes better than all those other quarterbacks that were drafted ahead of him, and I think he's the best quarterback in this class, I'm not telling you to pick him 1.01 when you can get him at at the end of the second round. I'm going to show you the give or take sweet spot where you can get him and still recoup value. And you get depth chart and all of that. And there's a newsletter that comes with it from basically June through December, where I update you on the past 3 years of rankings. I even do a dynasty and projection service that's a different cost for all players. That's $24.95. And it's just basically the quick answers with projections and cheats and basically Excel sheets that basically show you where I rank everybody in a tiered way, just like I do with the post-draft. Now, the post-draft and the pre-draft are one package. That's $21.95. And most people basically say they would pay both package prices just to get the pre-draft RSP. That's generally what people say. So you can get it at mattwaldman.com. It's available for download right now. The post-draft, I'll email you when it's ready, and you guys can then go and download that. And then the dynasty and projections rankings, it's like the companion. That's $24.95. Again, mattwaldman.com. And I do that June through December. I update you multiple times during the year. And how you get that's a little bit different, but it's described on the page.
I think once you guys hear this whole podcast, sorry, Nick, just real quick, you'll understand why, like how in depth Matt goes and how just unbelievable valuable this information is. And as far as the time you put in, I was going to ask you before I don't want to cut you off, Nick, but I'm curious, when does this process start for you, Matt, for a new year?
Honestly, it really just never ends, but
okay.
It's
ongoing.
It's ongoing.
June or July
but,
off.
But it's got peak years. Like I'm like, look, I'm not doing crap right now,
Mhm.
other than podcasts and relaxing and watching some movies and taking my dog for walks. But probably around June, I'll
Okay.
be I'll be watching tape again. And then, because what I do is film based for fantasy football, I study a lot of NFL tape during the week, during the season. And that helps inform where these guys are developing, where they're staying the same, that
Sure.
kind of thing, and inform how I adjust my process for how do I project to the pros. And I'm still studying prospects where I can. It's a little lighter during the season, but there's a minimum I'm trying to hit, and it's steady work. And then around after Thanksgiving, things start to get to a point where I'm starting to do more and more, to the point where I'm doing 12 to 18 hour day, 16,
Wow.
18-hour days in January and February, so that I can start putting the book together in March.
Love it.
It's such a resourceful product, just a wealth of knowledge. And if anybody is interested, please on YouTube, go to the link. It is in our bio. But Matt, we want to get started on some of this year's 2024 NFL draft takes from Mr. Matt Waldman. And I want to start with the quarterback position, and specifically Drake Maye, who is outside of your top 5 quarterbacks, if I'm not mistaken. And I just kind of wanted to pick your brain, your process, and see what your opinions are on the UNC quarterback, Drake Maye.
Sure. I think overall, he certainly is low when you compare ranking to ranking with other people. Score wise, I would say I'm probably on the side of the polarizing view, which is that he can be a starter. He can develop. He's got some really great physical skills. He's tough as nails in the pocket. He's got a big arm, and he can make some good throws. Those are all things that I would describe as what out of central casting, what those quarterbacks look like in the NFL that people draft in the first round. But we also know, and it's not just the Giants, it's any team in the NFL for the most part, they stink at picking the right quarterback for their team and giving him an opportunity to develop fully. And I think the biggest part isn't that whether they misevaluated the player, it's whether they've misevaluated themselves on what their expectation is to get that player to be the best that he can be, because they don't do the developing. The player has to do that on their own. But the environment that they're put in, if you're, say, Justin Fields, who needed more time to develop on how to read the field with accuracy and good processing, you don't put him on a team with a guy who's in love with his schemes to the point that he's doing minimal protection with bad offensive linemen against the likes of Myles Garrett and Zadarius, Smith, and a bunch of other guys who could basically cream them all day. It's like kidnapping someone, then putting them in front of a windowsill, putting their hand in it and slamming it on them, probably 10 or 12 times, until they've broken it, and then wait till next week and do it all over again for 17 weeks until the cops come and say, hey, we've rescued you. And now you're back in your house safe and sound the next year, and the windowsill's open and someone tells you to put your hand in it, or you got to reach for something that's in the windowsill, and you get PTSD symptoms, and your hands quivering uncontrolled, and you can't even bring it in there, even though logically that's what happens with quarterbacks when they're put in the wrong situation. That's the equivalent of that. So, Drake Maye, I look at him as one of those players who has some issues with processing the field. I know that the heat maps look good for him in the middle of the field, but heat maps do completion percentage accuracy. They don't do chartable accuracy, which chartable accuracy to me is, whether or not it was placed in the right spot and in a projectable way for NFL defenders who are one step to a half a step behind the defender, behind the receiver, can actually not, get to. And that's where people were all over Baker Mayfield and said, he's great. His completion percentage is unbelievable. And they talked about heat maps and showed all this stuff. But when you track and chart and you look at what's pinpoint accurate in the middle of the field against man coverage, it was bad. I mean, well, not bad, but it was subpar for a starter. I'll put it that way. And Odell and his daddy certainly let everybody know that year 3. And with that, and you can see it on the field. I mean, Baker's not a bad NFL quarterback. He's just not a top starter. And that was my big argument with him. And with Drake Maye, I think he needs a little bit more time, or else he's going to get thrown into the field too soon. And the things that are bad habits for him, like not taking the first read that he sees pre-snap that he should have taken early rather than getting greedy and then missing that read later because he can't get there, drifting outside the pocket, into pressure and creating pressure that he didn't need to have if he just stayed in it, and weird mechanical stuff with his back foot where it looks like it's rudderless at times, and he misses pinpoint throws that may show up well on the heat map, but don't show up well when you actually chart to the standard the RSP does. And so I think he can be good. I just think that he needs more time than what the NFL is going to do. So if the NFL were filled with Chuck Knowles and Marty Schottenheimers and Jeff Fisher with Steve McNair and said, we're going to give you some intermittent time to play, and then when you start seeing ghosts, we're not going to be Adam Gase, who's seen even more ghosts on the sideline. When you tell them that, they're going to take you off the field and say, okay, let's put our backup in. If we get close, things will slow down for you. Maybe you're still our guy. Don't worry about it. Or Jordan Love, give you some mop up time, give you some situational opportunities to start due to injury, play with the scout team. And when you get onto the field, suddenly all those things that were loose about your game, well, for 3 or 4 years, they tightened up. And now you only have to focus on the schematic game plan stuff and the in-game things that are enough as it is. And rather than having to overthink every little thing, even things that you thought you knew, because everything's unfamiliar on a certain level. And that's my concern about Drake Maye and why he wound up as a guy that could become a starter, but isn't ready right now. And the NFL is going to exacerbate that.
So do you think that it's possible that he would benefit from a year sitting behind another starting quarterback, learn from whatever coach he lands at? And do you have any teams in mind in the NFL that might fit that description?
Well, it's funny because somebody asked me if the Giants would actually be an utter disaster, because Kurt Bankert said it would be an utter disaster, I think, if that happened. And I would say with Drew Lock and Daniel Jones, maybe it wouldn't be a bad situation, because I think Drew Lock has kind of turned a corner on the level from a standpoint of like emotional maturity. And I'm not saying he was a bad, immature person. He's a good guy who's just his age and maybe started to figure out, oh, you know what? Like a lot of these guys who didn't figure it out early, I'm not going to come in and be a star. And I don't know as much about quarterbacking as I thought. And by the time I figured it out, they brought in Teddy Bridgewater to compete with me. And now I'm starting to realize that he might be able to relay that to Drake Maye. He might be able to help Drake Maye understand, don't lose your shot, because I was almost as physically talented as you were, if not more in certain ways. Daniel Jones might be able to have that same thing if he's not in denial about who he is. And I don't think he is. I think he knows. So, that might be helpful to a guy like him. And my advice to Kurt Bankert is this. I'll just say this. I enjoyed studying Kurt, and there was some fun things about his game. And I love the fact that he's getting into this area. But if you really want to win on Twitter, what you should have done is shown a little humility and go, not compare him to he's this guy that's not good. You should have said, you know what? You don't want him to become the next Kurt Bankert. And nobody could have said anything to you because, dude, you're a good quarterback. You got into the NFL. You're one of the top quarterbacks to play quarterback in the past 5 years because you made it to the NFL and played. That's the perspective I have. But if you want to have a sense of humor and people to realize that you're being real and enjoy, as you could have said, you don't want him to be the next Kurt Bankert, because now
self-deprecation is the easiest way.
Just my advice from an old man. You can take it for what little it's worth,
But yeah, and I mean, the Christian Hackenberg stuff to me is just out of control. It just doesn't make sense on any level. Hackenberg to me, I had a UDFA grade on. But you said something really interesting there that as really, I don't want to say reframing how I think about stuff, but it's definitely making me consider a lot of things, because I'm very high on Drake Maye. And a lot of the reason is, just to give a quick elevator, I don't want to get too into this. It's just the flaws that you brought up, I always view as things that can potentially be fixed with the right coaching. And some of the other stuff from these other quarterbacks, I view as like, can that be fixed? Will they ever have the frame? Will they ever have the ability to create and keep their eyes downfield out of structure? And will they have the arm talent, most importantly for me? But what you said is so important, because it may get to the point where Drake Maye's flaws that he has right now, not just mechanical issues, but some of the things that you broke down, are just going to get exasperated because he's going to go to a team that's going to play him right away. and it might not be the situation. And then you get into this situation like you talked about, where we may never get to see the max of what he can be from a physical standpoint. And so that's something really interesting to me, and I wonder, but I had to write this down because I wanted to ask you about specifically Matt, because I know last year there were two physical, let's just say, traits prospects that me and you were very aligned on, because we discussed this, I believe, on one of the CBS podcasts, and that was Anthony Richardson, who we really liked more than consensus, and Will Levis, who we did not like compared to consensus. And both were kind of physical traits prospects. But I want to look at Anthony Richardson versus Drake Maye in this regard. What were some of the differences about Richardson and Maye that maybe led you to having, because they're both maybe guys who we can consider physical traits, or maybe raw in some senses, and need to you need to project on both of those types of guys. What were some of the differences that led you to a higher projection maybe on Richardson versus Maye? Nick's
trying not to laugh because he knows where I'm going. He already knows. Like, he knows that I'm climbing the top rope right here.
Mm-hmm.
On this one. I'll put it to you this way.
Okay.
Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen pretty much in the offseason said we were pretty shocked at how good of a processor Anthony Richardson was compared to the take that he was just a physical prospect.
Right.
And that was really what I was talking about in October, November last year. Not last year, 2 years ago, I guess, or a year and a half ago. Because what he was inexperienced with seeing certain types of coverages, but the things that he saw, he processed at a high NFL level. And what he could do was, when he saw the opening or anticipated where the opening was going to be, the ball was out. He was very good at being able to layer tasks that are complex tasks as a quarterback and still make the accurate throw, like climb and slide from 2 points of pressure, keep your feet under you in the pocket, and make the accurate throw. While doing that, you're also manipulating the middle of the field defender to bait him and hold him in a spot so that you can end up throwing it into that window as you're making those types of moves. What I just described is like Joe Burrow type of play, Patrick Mahomes type of play. It's not Baker Mayfield type of play. Baker Mayfield still barely climbs a pocket. I know I'm picking on him, but I'm a Browns fan. What do you want me to tell you? So you've got that kind of situation with Richardson, where, maybe he didn't always see a certain type of coverage and he threw directly into the coverage and people go, see, he can't play. He's a raw, just physical toolsy guy. And I'm going, no, you just, it's like you showed a guy who aced trig a more potential, more in-depth calculus problem, but didn't teach him calculus yet.
Right.
But he's acing every concept that is underneath that. And then he's acing some things that are a side topic that are just important. Like, he's really good at physics, but the calculus he just doesn't know yet. So maybe he's not sending the rocket to the moon, but he's going to be able to tell you all you want to know about Newton. So I mean, that's where Anthony Richardson was. When you take Drake Maye, my concern is that he doesn't move well in the pocket in terms of climbing and throwing, and that's so important to stay in there. He escapes, and then when you invite pressure, now you can't scale those complex tasks as well, because you don't realize that the best way to own that pressure is to own the middle of the pocket where you can move efficiently. That's why Kyler Murray's so up and down, is because he's always trying to get outside the pocket and buy 8 million years of time. And it's a great highlight play 4 times a year, but he also is making his receivers reroute. His offensive linemen don't appreciate him, probably, whether they say so publicly or not. I mean, because he's ruining their position and making them work a lot harder for maybe a good play once a quarter, at not even once a quarter, probably once a game, and now they're losing because they haven't had a winning record under him, that's for sure. So at that same time with Maye, my fear is that it's hard to teach that pocket management because it's a window cell getting slammed shut. You've got to know when to move your hand. And if you're just worried about it hitting you, as opposed to going, I can time when to avoid it, or I can time when to mitigate it. If I make a fist and it slams on me, it won't break the bones in my hands. Something like that. Whereas, that processing thing is hard to unlearn. And there's some processing gaps and decision-making gaps that he can mature on, the decision-making gaps in terms of like situational stuff, but his ability to process that extra beat earlier than he is. He's a little bit late on throws. That's the thing that, I mean, Alex Smith never fixed.
True.
And he had a Pro Bowl season just 2 years before Patrick Mahomes replaced him. But, you know, there's guys who can do that with strong talent around them. But like for me, Anthony Richardson was unbelievably good at processing and moving in the pocket. He just also had ungodly physical tools. And it's hard to teach the physical tools. But I'll put it to you this way, and I'm not ashamed of it. I may end up being wrong because there's not that far away from each other. But Anthony Richardson had a higher grade for me than Caleb Williams did.
Wow.
And I love Caleb Williams. I think he'll be an instant starter. But Anthony Richardson to me is a stud. And when I look at Drake Maye, I see studly physical attributes with occasional high points as a decision maker and thrower, but the low points that are hard to teach, like the pocket movement and processing, that's why I think he can start with time to really get comfortable with everything. So now he's focused on that rather than my footwork, my arm position, where my feet are when I throw. Did I move right in the pocket, or am I aware of all that? And you got to remember the play call and all that crazy verbiage they do in the NFL with more complex defenses and weirder, harder to find tells.
It's a really interesting analysis, Matt, because I think about it almost like, and I know Nick's going to scoff at this reference, this analogy, but I think of it almost like golf. When I get up to the ball and I'm thinking about all 14 different things I need to do from a footwork standpoint, the hips, the arms, I hit it terribly. And then when I just go up to it and I hit it and it's natural to me, I hit it great. And some of that is like you said with Richardson, some of that is natural. And you saw it on the tape last year. I had a chance to study him for Beyond the Box Score for CBS, and I watched some games on tape of him. And he had some moments of great processing, even last year as a rookie with the Colts in that system. And there are moments I do feel like you said, and you even said it, there are high moments of that with Maye, but you're right. It's not always there. And part of what I bank on with Maye is a big part of it is the physical attributes. And I do believe that stuff with the right coach, like a Brian Dable, can be fixed. I watched him do it with Josh Allen, but the other stuff that you're talking about may not be able to be fixed, that innate ability to process and manipulate a pocket and understand that. And that's something that is definitely concerning on that stand. But while I don't really put too much faith on people who say like he's scattershot, his accuracy is off, I'm like, that can be fixed. It's the other stuff that I'm not so sure. And I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Well, it was a good discussion for sure. And I like the fact that you brought up the golf analogy, even though I don't play. I laugh because there's a guy from New Jersey who's actually a real old man, not a middle-aged guy like me, who I hang out with at the dog park with his Doberman Pinscher, who was a sniper and a ranger who fought in World War II and actually World War II, I think Korea and Vietnam. And he's a shooting instructor still and a golf pro. And he's had a crazy life. Okay. But like he showed somebody Golf Pro. And what was funny is he showed somebody goes, "Can you give me an example of how I should work on my swing?" He's like, "Yeah." So he had the guy give a swing and he goes, "Okay, there's a lot of different things that you're not doing right, but I'm not going to tell you any of them. What I want you to do right now is I want you to not look down at the ball. I just want you to look forward and just swing." And he did. He goes, "How'd that feel?" He goes, "A lot different." And then he said, "I'm going to break down everything that you did when you looked down at the ball and you were thinking about it, and everything that you did when you weren't thinking about it that was right." And kind of went through all that. And I was like, yeah, it's because it's ingrained. All this work has to be ingrained and to a level of like just subconscious, even though you have to put conscious work into it to happen.
What's going on, Big Blue Banter listeners? I'm excited for the football season for several reasons. And one of those reasons is Prize Picks, which is North America's largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform. And it's so simple to use. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals, sharks, and people who are going to exploit you, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you just watch the winnings roll in. It's very simple to play and gives you a little extra skin. I've set my picks in less than 60 seconds. There are so many stats to choose from, and the withdrawals of funds are easy and quick. Dan and I will be adding a segment to our show before every game where we pick our favorite stats, more or less, yards or touchdowns, what have you, and we'll be discussing why from a scheme, matchup, and game theory perspective. I love their promotions and how easy their interface is to operate at PrizePicks. I may select more on tackles for a loss from Bobby Okereke or Kayvon Thibodeau next game. They also do other sports as well. It's a really cool experience. Please join Dan and I in the fun of PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. You will not regret it. You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
Great
A
way to
sniper
describe it.
and a golf pro. Talk about accuracy.
And a smart ass.
Yeah, absolutely love that. I want to talk about another quarterback prospect. It got me thinking when you brought up the pocket manipulation and playing within structure. Another quarterback who's being linked to the New York Giants loosely, and that's JJ McCarthy. I wanted to kind of just get your opinions on JJ McCarthy and how you think he would translate, let's say in year one. Do you think he's more of a longer term project?
He's going to be, if he's made a year one guy, he's going to be like that Baker Mayfield in the sense of people are going to get really excited when he does good things because he's going to do some good things. And then we're going to see whether or not he can sustain those good things and build on them in year two. And if he believes the hype a little too much, or if there's some gaps in his game that defenses are able to adjust to that he can't figure out quickly enough, then it may proceed like Baker Mayfield for different reasons. But he was one of the more difficult evaluations I had at quarterback in the past 5 years because I love his footwork. He has a really strong fundamental base so that you can, when he moves in the pocket, he moves with efficiency. He can also be dynamic with his movements because he's athletic. And he kind of seems to know when to do which more often than not and keep his feet under him to be able to throw an accurate ball. And he's pretty accurate in the short and intermediate ranges of the field. So that's very promising. It's the areas beyond like 28 yards, beyond 28 yards in the vertical and deep ranges for me, where you don't see as much. Part of that's the function of the system, but even when I tracked it, it wasn't great. And so you'd like to see a larger sample size for one. You'd also like to see he has highs and lows as a processor. His highs as a processor are really high, and that's awesome. And they're what people thought were highs for Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson didn't have any highs, in my opinion, as a processor. He had lows and what you're supposed to do as a quarterback signed to an NFL contract, not a starter, just a bare minimum starter. Like that's what happens a lot is when you see people praise quarterbacks. Sometimes they're like, it's like they're saying, my son Johnny, he is so smart. He got, he passed his algebra quiz. He passed English. He's going to get a degree, not my John's smart. My son, Johnny, he's so smart. He's a valedictorian who got a perfect score on his ACT and SAT, and he's getting a scholarship to MIT. There's a little bit of difference there. And I feel like a lot of times we're not projecting to the NFL when we talk about quarterbacks with NFL traits. We're saying, because they are really good, but relative to Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or anybody who has a second contract, even Dak Prescott or Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, you would say, how good are they really relative to those guys? Because that's what they're all looking for. Let's be honest. We're looking for that. We're not looking for, we're not looking for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is a good quarterback, but we're not looking for that. So it's the same thing. That's why there was hope for Drew Lock, but it didn't happen. And why the Broncos said we're looking elsewhere. So that's the problem. So when you look at JJ McCarthy, I haven't seen proof of concept that he can't get rid of the lows just yet, especially in the red zone, backed up deep in his own territory. He makes a lot of immature mistakes with those that he's got to grow out of, and I think he can. But there's also questionable processing decisions where you go, did you really see that?
Did you get lucky? Yeah.
Did you get lucky? I think he really saw the Michigan, the
Ohio State one.
throw.
Yeah,
I think he really saw that.
I think he saw that too.
Yeah, I also think he saw the sideline throw that he rolled right to that he
to Alabama
underneath the defender. I thought he saw that too. But there were a couple throws that were in games like against Bowling Green that I go, I know you didn't see that.
Yeah,
you didn't see it and it didn't work. And there are a lot of games like that where you see that. So he needs a little bit more time too, but I still think he can be solid.
He had another one against UNLV that was similar to that Ohio State one where he just basically earholed the linebacker in the second quarter. And it really got me thinking. I was like, is this like, because UNLV was one of the first games I watched, and I'm still not done with my evaluation of him, but I was like, is this something that he does a lot more than I know about? Because I see the Ohio State play a lot, but like the UNLV one was pretty damn similar. And I think he had one against Indiana too. It was a little bit different, but he just thread the needle where the linebacker just narrowly missed the football. But hey, man, game of inches.
Yeah, for sure.
Though some people will look at that and be like, that's picked off in the NFL. They're like, that's the speed in the NFL. And I understand that as well. But just to give a frame of reference, and I know people hate doing this, including us, but where does he, in ranking is ranking, but where does he just rank, you can say, or shape up with the rest of the class for you?
For me, he's the number 5 quarterback, and that means that he has a grade that is close enough that you could say within a year or two he should be an NFL starter. Now, and then if he builds on more after that, maybe he can become a good NFL starter who's worthy of a second contract. So to me, the Mason Dixon line for that, and it's an older player, but it's Jake Plummer.
I see that too,
because Jake Plummer had the feet. Bill Walsh loved his pocket movement ability to work in and out of structure, but he had that wild hair that could he tame it? and he never quite tamed it. He had moments of like brilliance and then moments where you just slap your head and go, McFly, that's not going to work, man. And I think that's the type of guy JJ McCarthy could wind up being if he doesn't tame the wild hair stuff.
I see that, and I see like a high-end example for me would be like if you get to like a Rich Gannon type of level, just because I see that would be like the high end for me. But the problem with both of those comps, for me at least, is like these types of players are going to be maximized in my mind in something a Shanahan type of offense, just Shanahan principles. This is not what the Giants are running with Brian Dable, and it just stands out to me. And I know he ran a pro style system at Michigan, but I don't know, for maximizing his talent, I just consider that at times. I want to ask you about one more quarterback that's been linked to the Giants, and we can wrap up on specific quarterbacks there because we've gone long and we want to get to your thoughts on running backs and receivers too. But this quarterback you have ranked really high, and I think this is probably the biggest difference we see, I would say, among the quarterback class. And it's just, for me, I have a trouble with his projection to the NFL, and it's Michael Penix. So I believe you have as your quarterback too.
Yeah.
I'll just go over my concerns first real quick and just briefly, just to see where you're at with those and then get your analysis on it. From a projection standpoint, I worry about how it's going to look at the NFL level versus when he doesn't have the team that and I know there's the Indiana tape, so I'm sure you're going to get to that. I want to hear that. But I worry about how it happens when he doesn't have that team around. I worry about him not using the middle of the field a lot because I think those are the throws he'll need to make at the NFL level. And then I just worried that the game, I may be putting way too much on this, Matt, but I do worry about how he looked against Michigan. That's just specifically that style of defense and that scheme, because I felt like it sped up his whole process in that game. He looked all out of whack from a post-snap standpoint. And that's this type of defense that simulated pressures, that type of stuff he's going to see a lot at the NFL level. So with all the, obviously, as we've seen so many coordinators changing. Now, I want to shout out D-Kit, who's a avid listener of podcasts and a big fan of Penix. And he sent me like all the clips of you talking about Penix. And I watched one today of you of Big Blue View. And I told him I would make sure to ask you about Penix. So I'm going to let you take the floor now, Matt, and describe what you like about Penix and maybe how you respond to some of the projection concerns.
Well, my strong safety apparently did not like you dogging Penix. Okay, I'll just put it that way. But yeah, I think that I understood the criticisms because, yeah, again, he had 3 excellent receivers and really a very kind of an underrated tight end, not maybe for the NFL, but just in terms of Westover, who's kind of a Frank Wycheck type, if you ask me, way back in the day, like who's really one of the best pass catchers in this class, even if he's not a great athlete. So you have all that. You spread the field a lot, so you worry about that inside stuff. But from what I charted, I saw a lot of good inside throws, and I saw a lot of opportunities, kind of like Anthony Richardson, where he had to climb and throw, and he had to do it where he was on the run, come to a sudden stop, have his feet in a balanced position, and make a throw into coverage that was NFL caliber. Tight window, good placement, and showing the ability to decelerate and throw like that. There are a lot of guys in the NFL who don't do that well. So I saw a lot of things like that I thought were pretty good. Look, buddy, I'm talking good about Penix, so let's hang in here. But yeah, I mean, the big thing is that I also liked how he handled pressure in terms of throwing the ball away. He managed the game well. He wasn't a high interception thrower, even when he was getting that hand crushed in the windowsill repeatedly at Indiana. And as a result of that, he would be in a scenario where he would just throw the ball away. Or if he made a throw into coverage, it was a defensible throw. Like when you watched it, you'd say that was placed only where it could be for it to make sense. Like either the receiver was going to catch it or he wasn't. And that turned it. Sorry, there's probably somebody out back that he's like,
just doing the protect.
That's all.
This happens with Nick's Dog Phoenix all the time. Yeah. It's part of the show now.
Yeah,
it's all good.
That's all right. So let me close the door here real quick. But there we go. But Penix is someone that I look at what he does with the arm talent, outside, inside, pocket presence, game management decisions. Will his game have to expand a little bit more with different types of coverages in the middle of the field? Absolutely, because there's things he hasn't seen due to the offenses he's been in or the time that he's had to be able to even process when he was in an offense that may have lend itself toward it. Indiana, maybe a little bit more. But I think he's the guy after Caleb Williams who, if you gave him 5 to 7 games on the bench, and you had to put him in because the owner told you to, or somebody got hurt, then I think he could survive and still be able to grow the next year without being too damaged. Whereas the other ones, I'm a little more worried that the fit's going to have to be fantastic. They're going to need a Brock Purdy-esque fit. And that's not knocking Purdy. It's just, to level up fast enough. He was always good at processing. That was one of his strengths. And pocket management was always one of his good things. But I agree with Dan Orlovsky in that what he said last year. If you took Mac Jones and played trading places with Brock Purdy, you would have seen Mac Jones level up more because, again, he had those traits as well. Right. And he had a higher draft capital. If he was in a situation where everyone's doing what they're supposed to do on a consistent basis around him, it forces you not to have to think as much, and you just do what you were supposed to. But when things aren't happening like that, you overthink, and that's how guys get into quicksand. So yeah, I mean, Penix, to me, really liked his game. I understood that people were kind of like, I didn't like how he handled pressure. I did. I liked how he moved in the pocket. And I charted the Texas game and the Michigan game in the playoffs because people saw them as polar opposites. And my charting they were very similar in outcome. So when I see that, then I know that maybe there's a little bit of influence of results as opposed to process, at least from my perspective. And I could be wrong. I mean, I've certainly missed on my share of quarterbacks. Most recently, I'd say my biggest miss was the quarterback. See, I can't even say I have a cornerbacks mentality right now. I forget the kid out of San Diego with the Los Angeles Chargers.
Herbert.
Yeah. Justin Herbert. I missed on him. I was probably lower on him than I was on Drake Maye, because I had concerns about things. At the same time, I've had my hits too for similar reasons with other guys. And,
no one's going to hit 100%.
We'll go.
Matt, don't beat yourself up. The NFL is horrible at this.
It is. But I'm just trying to be real with folks,
right,
and understand, because we're talking about a lot of good things, and I'm appreciative of the praise, but at the same time, to be real, it's like, if I'm going to miss on Penix, it's going to be because I overestimated what I saw in the middle of the field. If I miss on Maye, it's because I probably overemphasized some of the processing gaffes that he had and things that I thought maybe were harder to correct.
Sure. And that's going to happen for all of us throughout our evaluation. And I appreciate you, saying that, but I also appreciate your evaluation of Penix. And it's going to have me, at the very least, go back and watch more Penix. And that's something I plan to do. And I haven't watched any of the Indiana. That's what I want to watch. And that's what TK told me to really take a look at. And I like that idea of watching Indiana, because then I could remove the idea of, one, you had all these years in the, to play quarterback. You're 24, 25, playing against younger guys. You have extra year in the Washington system. You have those three receivers. So I really like the other two, by the way, not just Odunze. I think those other two are actually really good, especially McMillan. And then the O-line, having those two tackles, because he didn't have much at Indiana. So I'm excited to watch some Indiana film, and I'm happy he broke that down.
Matt, I want to transition here to the running back position. And I think the consensus, at least among the draft community, is that this is a bad running back class. As you know, the New York Giants just parted ways with 26. Saquon Barkley is now a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. They signed Devin Singletary, but behind Devin Singletary, there's not a lot of depth there. You got Eric Gray and you have Gary Brightwell. What are your overall thoughts on this running back position? And do you have a player in mind who could possibly be selected in the second round out of all of these running backs? Is there a second round guy for you in this draft class?
Or first round if you see it?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, and I think that this class is one where, when we talk about good or bad running back classes, I talk about in the RSP in the chapter that it's like, if we're really being real about this, we shouldn't look back and say like 2017 with Christian McCaffrey, because there were 6 backs who gave multiple years of starter ability, and that's an outlier. Most classes give somewhere between 1 to 3 repeat starters. So we're talking about plus or minus 1 being the differentiator between, this is a good class, and this class stinks. So right now I have this, I think this class is at 2. And there are about 10 players outside of those first 2 who are so closely linked together between number 3 and number 12 that if they just fix 1 or 2 things, They could be the third best back in this class, and could be 3 to make this a good class, or 4 or 5 to make this an outstanding class. They're not that far away. So they're a bargain if you're a fantasy player, and they're a bargain for NFL teams continually, because RPs have been bargains now because of the way they're being used and how it's looked at. So to me, the guy who's a first round talent but doesn't need to be a first round grade is Jonathan Brooks of Texas.
Yeah.
Just smooth, physical when he wants to be, and really like attacks defenders first and then uses movement to get away from them. Jamal Charles was great at that, another Texas back. And I would say that Brooks has more power than Charles did, but he's got some gliding speed that maybe is not as sudden as Charles, but it's still, he's got the ability to flip a field and extend plays into breakaways. He is, again, very smooth mover, best pass protector in this class, if you ask me. Technically sound, can deliver a punch, can handle inside, outside, even handle some things above his weight and size pay grade that you wouldn't expect, at least long enough to give his quarterback time not to get killed or get the ball out. So really, really like that. Very smart decision maker. I mean, I think if he was healthy from the ACL tear, he would have been probably my number 2 back last year. But he wouldn't have gotten a chance to be able to play because the number 1 back was his teammate.
Yeah.
But it would have been that close. That's how good I think he is. Blake Corum is the safest back in this class to me at Michigan. He's not real big, and he's not really fast, but he's super quick, great change of direction, very versatile in terms of how you could use him inside and outside the tackles in the run game. Creative but mature in how he makes decisions. Pretty good pass receiver. Can give you something as a blocker as long as you're not asking too much. And he might have the potential to add a little bit of weight and maintain that quickness. If he does, there was a guy out of the New Jersey area several years ago who had an unfortunate end to his career in Ray Rice, who was about 205 pounds when he came out, not super fast, but pretty quick, and could carry a load for a team and was very smart as a runner. And year 2, he came into the Baltimore Ravens organization about 15, 20 pounds heavier with a little bit more explosion because of that quick twitch muscle he added, and became an all-pro. And I think that there's an outside chance that Corum could be that. But at worst, he's going to be a very good contributor who's going to give you production as one of the top 2 backs on your roster, even if he's not the man. So those are the guys that probably I would look for in the second round from that standpoint. And there's other guys you could probably get in rounds 3 to undrafted who could give you value as a complement, depending whether you want the fast complement to Motor or you want the big complement to Motor, because Motor's a weird guy as a prospect. He's short, he's light, he's slow, he's not extremely quick, and not very strong. But he's got great contact balance, and he's got unbelievable vision. And he is the extreme outlier example of a player who has compensatory factors that, like, he's got all-pro vision, like maybe multiple time all-pro vision, and street free agent AFL like physical skills. Like, that just, if you were, it's the 2 wide extremes.
Yeah.
Him. He's admirable that way.
I want to ask you something specifically about the running back position, Matt, because 2018 was a different time for me, and I'm not trying to use this show to just like heap praise on you the entire time, but I really do think it's well deserved, and especially in this specific regard. But I always try to learn each year more and more. Nick's helped me learn a lot about the game and the X's and O's. But in 2018, I had a very different opinion of how to evaluate running backs. And I remember watching a video of one of your breakdowns that you put on YouTube from RSP, and it really shaped and changed how I looked at the running back position in general. And it was a video about, I think it was either Nick Chubb or Saquon Barkley. And you had Nick Chubb, if I'm not mistaken, above Saquon Barkley in that class. And to me, that's one of the best calls, because I know some Giants fans are not going to want to hear this, but Nick Chubb is a better running back than Saquon Barkley at what it means to be a running back. And at the time, I really looked a lot at speed score and things like that. What's your size? What's your speed? And I don't necessarily think that's the right route. And one thing that you really opened my eyes to is how important processing is for a running back. So as we look forward toward this class, who would you say are maybe some backs that are underrated from a processing standpoint? And also I want to know who, and maybe it's just Blake Corum for the second question, but who is the best processing back in this class?
I think Brooks is the best processing back, and Corum is a quick second. So we've already talked about them and some reasons why. Their eyes, the way they see something, the way their brain processes it quick enough to deliver a solution with their footwork in an efficient manner. It's that connection, and it's that chain of being able to observe, identify, and react instantaneously. And in order to do that, you really have to train your feet in a manner to where you understand what types of solutions you can deliver in a given situation. And that requires also comfort with real good spatial awareness and comfort with fast moving objects and what depth they have with that. And so a lot of that's trained through just repetitive play and can be developed that way. And it is instinctive, though if you really break it down, it's actually just a lot of playing experience and having the right experiences and being good at identifying what's the right thing to do from what's the wrong thing to do. But there are also backs who have learned and built on it and studied and realized, okay, I've also can incorporate box count into it and what advantages I have to where I should go, where I shouldn't go, what kind of blitz cues a linebacker's giving, or if I think that there's going to be a run twist and I can figure out where I can adjust pre-snap. There's a lot of that, as well as things like down and distance management, knowing that my coach is going to read me and take me out of the game if it's 2nd and 8 inside our own 10 and I'm trying to bounce a run outside. Now it's going to be 3rd and 13 instead of 3rd and 9, or 3rd and 7, where you can keep the playbook open. So these are things backs can learn. Other guys who are underrated like that, Dylan Johnson of Washington, he's not super fast, but he is a very smart runner. And I think that he can give you a lot of value because he's a tackle breaker. And like Devin Singletary, he breaks tackles. He's a smart decision maker. He's versatile in terms of run scheme. And he's bigger, and I think he's faster than Devin. And I think he's faster than what he showed because he was playing on 2 bad legs all year long. And he was still probably healing up for the combine when he ran the 4.68. Or I think it's a 4.68 40 at that point. But other guys who can also process well, Ray Davis is a good processor on the field, and a powerful dude. And he runs kind of like a mix of Rice and Walker and little Travis Henry. He runs bigger than his size. He's 211. He looks like he runs about another 10 pounds heavier than he actually is. So he's a good processor. I think Blake Watson out of Memphis is a good processor and a very good pass catcher. Has to become a better route runner, but he's speedy, 4.39, 4.4 type of speed, and kind of more of a Gio Bernard type, which translates to, if you say to the guy who got in at the right time for the NFL environment, who was Gio Bernard-esque, that was Austin Eckler. So he's kind of an Austin Eckler type at his highest. Those guys process well. Dylan Lobby processes well, the kid out of New Hampshire. I think that, Kamani Vidal can give you a little bit of that too. And I mean, depending on the scheme, if you do gap scheme runs, Isaac Garendo out of Wisconsin is big. He's fast, he's quick, and he's powerful. And if you say, this is the run meet, hit that thing fast, give it the gas, he's going to do it, so that's a bunch.
Yeah, you mentioned Wisconsin. Dan over there, he's starting to get hot and heavy mentioning these Wisconsin guys.
The opposite, actually, for me in this class.
Because he transferred away?
Well, no, because he transferred away. I had a couple more one running back question I wanted to ask you about, but this is not a player who's been linked to the Giants. And we're going to ask you about one player who has been, because you haven't talked about him yet. But I've been on this podcast before. I've been called a Wisconsin homer. At times I have been, maybe, but I've been right about some of these calls. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. This is not to you, Matt. This is about something else. But one player I don't like who came from Wisconsin personally versus consensus is Braylon Allen. And I want to get your evaluation of Braylon Allen because he's not someone like I just don't understand how this guy could be considered a potential RB1 in any class. I don't think he runs with enough power for his size. And I'm not sure his style is going to work at the NFL level either. It worked in Wisconsin's scheme, but I'm curious to get your take on Allen. Am I off on him or where do you stand on him?
No, I'm a little somewhere in between on him.
Okay.
Which is that when you watch his game, it's very fragmented, basically meaning that there are certain elements in certain reps where you look at and go, that was fantastic. But the rest of the rep, you're like, that's a manure sandwich. Like, you're like, oh, the lettuce was great, but we could get rid of that rancid meat. Okay. Or, oh, and this sandwich, the tomato and the meat were great, but the bread's moldy is all get out. I could have there's penicillin in here. It's like that kind of thing. You could build a good sandwich out of his prospect profile if you looked at one little element on a play that didn't work out well that looked good, or even plays that did work out well, but in the NFL, you're not going to be in those situations as often, or they're not as elevated in importance as other things where he's failing. So, good footwork at times, really sudden ability to kind of stop, start, and avoid defenders by displacing his feet. I like that. I see moments of that. Gap scheme stuff, he can do very well with. Zone scheme, he tries to bounce some things that he shouldn't. And he makes some immature mistakes trying to hit home runs that he shouldn't. Does he have enough speed to flip the field? Absolutely, he does. Does he have the acceleration if he gets a reasonable runway to get into the secondary? For sure. Does he have some cutting ability? Yes, but he also clicks his heels at times and has some issues where he slips and falls a lot in repeatable types of scenarios where he needs to kind of figure that out, because he's going to deal with more traffic and penetration into the backfield, where his response to what he does is inefficient, or clicking his heels and falling over, or making a cut and he's got one of his feet well inside his pads and now he topples over like Humpty Dumpty, So then on top of that, you have the pad level, like you said, the power. When people hear me say this, they're going to say, well, I look at the RSP and you said that he has elite power, and in the grade that I have, he has elite power. He can run through multiple tackle attempts in terms of wraps, reaches, and bounce off some hits too in given runs, and that qualifies as elite power. But let's just kind of look at it this way. I think we can all agree that Derrick Henry has elite power as a running back in the NFL. But I think if I said to you, let's compare Derrick Henry to Earl Campbell, and you watch Earl, and even if you never saw Earl Campbell because of your generation, go to YouTube and look Earl Campbell versus Los Angeles Rams, and you watch that run for me, or watch Walter Payton highlights, and you look for elite power and contact balance. It's different than what Derrick Henry does, as powerful as he is. And I think Braylon Allen's more like that, where like he qualifies for elite power, but what you expect isn't there, because what happens is, you said his running style and you've queued it up perfectly, because it's really about when he attacks people, he oftentimes doesn't have his hips and his pads aligned to run through the target. He has his hips to the outside, so he's trying to bounce off the target and run away from people. And as Chris Spielman would have said, the former linebacker, as he said about Michael Bush, the former Louisville back who played with the Raiders for a while, you've got to stop trying to be a small back. You've got to learn when to be the big back that you are, because you'll be much better. He goes, and I remember learning this from him while watching a game with him and D'Angelo Williams, and talking about how much more powerful D'Angelo Williams was as a shrimp compared to Michael Bush.
Right.
And that's the thing with Jacobs, is he's not utilizing all of his tools to maximize it, and you don't know whether he will. And I think at best, if he doesn't change anything, he could still go to a team like the Chargers. They give him nice downhill runways on gap plays, and he could give you 1,100, 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns in the right scheme. But like DeAndre Swift, he won't be a great all-around back. He'll just be a good back with a good team around him who's expendable after his contract's over, because they don't want to overpay him.
Right. That's a great evaluation.
Yeah, that was a great evaluation. We want to get to receivers, but we have one more running back question real quick, and it's about Trey Benson. There's some rumors out there that he's linked to the Giants, and the Giants are enamored with him. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on Trey Benson, and also, and this is the Florida State running back Trey Benson, and also, is 47 too early, in your opinion, with this general draft class for a selection of a player like Trey Benson?
I think if you're a team that's rebuilding, probably yes. It's probably a little too early. Learn from your mistake with Saquon Barkley in the sense that Saquon Barkley was a great running back, but if you're not going to feature the offense through him, and you don't have a quarterback yet, or an offensive line yet, or receivers yet, or maybe even a defense fully yet, that maybe picking the running back as your lead anchor to start your team is not a good idea. If you happen upon one later, that's great. But I would say for Trey Benson, it's probably still a little early. The offensive line looks more promising for sure. Needed receivers. I would say you have some guys that are good on your depth chart, but maybe not starters high end yet, or have proven it fully yet. And you have, your quarterback situation is unsolved. We'll put it that way. We know that one's on the way out the door. The other one could actually turn out to be pretty good. Or he winds up a career backup who's stable. But to me, you're addressing all those situations first. But Benson on his own, if you were in the position to get one and it was the second round and Benson was there, I like his speed. He's a good gap runner. I think he has potential as a zone runner, but he's got to press creases a little bit deeper to really, for the NFL level, be a better manipulator and problem solver. Really good hands as a pass catcher, can adjust to the ball at a high level. The route running could be a little bit better. But overall, yeah, he strikes me as a guy that if you're a team that's like, we're about to become a contender, we just need a running back to do that, he could be that guy for you.
Okay, interesting. That's Trey Benson. All right, let's transition to the wide receivers. I know you've given us a lot of time, Matt, so you can just give us a little heads up when you want to get out of here, and we can wrap up then. But we do need to talk a little bit wide receivers with you because it's big for the Giants right now. They're very interested in this position. They're either going to, the way we see it, Nick and I, if they don't go with the receiver at 6, they're going to probably do everything in their power as long as the value meets the need, or the value meets up, I should say, to get one at 47. So let's go. Let's say as far as 6 goes, if you're the Giants, let's say in your mind, Matt, where do you have a difference in your mind from these 3 receivers? Does anyone stand out to you? Is there one receiver you would take over the other 2?
Well, I mean, I think when you look at the depth chart for the Giants, I see the logic for Rome Odunze because of the fact that he is the best combination of the physical traits of the 2 receivers, Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., where he's got the speed of Neighbors, the quickness, some of the quickness of Neighbors, the physicality of Marvin Harrison with better movement skills, and he's got good hands and can win at the catch point very well. And he's got some promising route running game. So I think he's probably the best of both worlds, where you can use him at all 3 positions. Whereas with Marvin Harrison, I wouldn't poo-poo that if he got a chance to be drafted there, but he's a little bit more solidly in as an X receiver and maybe a big slot sometimes, but that's about it. Malik Neighbors could play all 3 positions, but you've got a lot of guys who are shorter, and the guys that you have who are big maybe aren't as versatile high end as route runners. So that's where I think Odunze probably gets the nod for me. If you're looking purely on fit, if you're looking purely on talent, I'll give Neighbors the slight edge.
Fair.
What about day 2 guys, or just any wide receivers outside of those big 3? Who are some of your favorites, and do you deviate at all from the generalized consensus?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a Keon Coleman fan, and there are a lot of people that are polarized on him.
I kind of am
too. People talk about him being slow, but you look at how quick he is. He gets separation on timing routes, and he stacks a lot of quality college defensive backs early in routes. So not only is he the tight window, just get the ball in the area, I'm going to catch this thing, which is what he is, but he's also a curl route, dig route, comeback. receiver who can do that. It's just if you don't have a quarterback with anticipation and he's not the first read, yeah, I see the little signal there. And you come back to that second read, he might not be open anymore because you took too long. But if you had a Joe Burrow-esque anticipator or a Brock Purdy, this dude's going to be open all day as the second option or the first option that you go to, and can give you maybe a little Brandon Marshall-esque type of skills to his game, or maybe more of a Mike Williams, T. Higgins type, in that realm. And I joke he's the LeGarrette Blount of wide receivers, in the sense that everybody is like, oh, he's big and he's slow and he's a plotter. And then you watch this guy return punts and you're like,
no,
what are you looking at, people? Like LeGarrette Blount returning kickoffs, and you go, what are you looking at? Because the hips and the footwork is really quick and very subtle. And Keon Coleman does that. It's not like he averaged like 6 yards per return either. When he was their returner, and he had some big returns. Yeah. So Coleman, I like. Ricky Pearsall, I'm a big fan of. I think he's maybe a little bit on the small side for what maybe the Giants are looking for, but speed galore, can be used in a variety of systems. He has the route running, the releases, and the ability to adjust in and outside structure. I am a big fan of Jermaine Burton. He's a kind of a Robert Woods type. Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen? Like,
who knows?
Judge that.
Yeah. So there's that. Other guys, Anaya Smith, who's to me reminds me of Golden Tate. He was began school as a top-rated running back. Kind of figured that he's more of a limited type of starter as a running back. You want to use him more in space or limited between the tackles. So they kicked him out at wide receiver. Then you start watching his kid's wide receiver tape, and you're like, releases, has a good book on releases and does it with artistry. Okay, check. Okay, manipulates people with his stems and tells efficient stories. He's not trying to be playground. He gets open doing it. Check. All right. Catch point stuff, really tight hand positions, tough, gets ping-ponged off defenders, dives for balls away from his frame with good technique. All right, keep going. How about after the catch? Runs like a running back after the catch, sets up defenders with patient presses, blocked or unblocked, and has a little bit of power to him too. And I'm like, sounds like Golden Tate to me at the top of his career, could play inside and outside. And he doesn't have some of the Golden Tate-isms in terms of how he caught the ball. Tate could do it well, and then sometimes he did stuff that you're like, okay, that wasn't great technique, but you still got it done. So I'm a fan. The problem is DWI, marijuana possession, and unregistered firearm all in one pinch, as people would say. Yeah. And he had that. And so can they address that? The marijuana doesn't bother me, as I've said on multiple podcasts. You got, basically NFL saying, we're telegraphing our tests anyway, unless you made a mistake, and then we're really going to be hard on you. And the firearms thing, he's in Texas. He should just got it licensed. It's the DWI. That's the big issue.
Agreed.
So he's, if he's matured a little bit, that's good. Javon Baker, I think everybody likes Javon Baker. So, again, good catch point, good after the catch, good positioning, has some hand issues that can be tightened up a little bit. And I'm a big Malik Washington guy who is kind of more of a slot type that y'all don't really need.
Yeah.
What about Malachi Corley? And I know he's another slot type of individual. Just he seems like a unique prospect.
Yeah, he's kind of in that Cordero Patterson kind of scenario where it's like ungodly like ability to run after the catch that makes you think of DJ Moore. But the problem is that he's a zone receiver right now. He's not a matchup man-to-man receiver. You're going to have to do a lot of work with scheming or zone to get him open. And that means those 3rd and 15 plays when he's covered by a good man-to-man cornerback, and everybody knows it's coming, but you're going to throw it to him anyway. He's not ready for that prime time. He might one day, and if he does, he's going to be a stud if that happens. But he's got a lot to prove in that department. But he can catch, he can definitely run, and he can get open in zone, and he'll be helpful to somebody in those capacities right now.
I wanted to ask you, Matt, about your wide receiver 4 in this class. Assuming you have the first 3 as their wide receiver 3, I think this is a fun discussion just because a lot of people have different players. Nick and I have a different player as our wide receiver 4 than most people have. So I was curious, one, are those 3 that we discussed here in their own tiers, 1, 2, 3, and then 2, who would be 4 for you?
Xavier Worthy, which probably surprises some RSP subscribers for a while because they know I always joke around that speed is the cleavage of NFL decision makers.
I agree with that statement. It's so true.
That's excellent.
Especially at running back.
It is totally the case. And so they think that I like slow players. I've even had people joke with me, go, "You just like slow players," like I've got speed envy or something, But it's really not that. I like complete players. And when I watched Xavier Worthy, at first I saw him fight the ball, and I had him much lower on my board. And then I started watching all his tape. And as I got through all his tape, I saw that, he fought the ball at times, but he usually caught it still. And while that may get exacerbated in the NFL at times, it's like, was he Cortland Sutton, where it's like, hey, man, feed me 5 times and I'll at least give you 2 big plays. And you're still going to pay me because they were 2 really big plays. But I'm going to bomb on 1 or 2, if not 3 catches in a game too. You just got to keep feeding me like a selfish power forward, who misses a lot of shots but makes enough that he's going to be your leading scorer. But your team may not be all that great. So that's kind of where I thought Worthy would fall, but he doesn't. He makes a lot of tough catches with good technique in the middle of the field. And then instead of looking at him as a Henry Ruggs or a Ted Ginn or at best a Mike Wallace type, I started looking at guys like, Titus Young if he didn't have emotional problems and criminal problems. Deshaun Jackson when healthy and at his peak career. Isaac Bruce? They're all about that same size. Isaac Bruce was 168, even when he was with the 49ers late in his career,
right?
And still outrunning people and making tough plays, even if he wasn't peak Rams career. Then I'm thinking Xavier Worthy has a chance to ascend to that tier of Bruce and Jackson if everything works out.
Worthy was more physical too after the catch than I expected going into his tape. For Yak, like contact balance. Like I was expecting this dude to just, you blow on him and he falls over. No, not at all. I have a bunch of different notes of plays where he was much more physical than I anticipated. I wanted to ask you real quick, and we want to be cognizant of your time, but since you brought up Xavier Worthy, how about Adonai Mitchell? What's your thoughts on AD Mitchell?
He's more of the speed is the cleavage of NFL evaluators at this stage. He can be helpful, and I think he could turn into a number 2 receiver, but it's the short and intermediate routes that he needs to refine his breaks. He has a lot of good tools releasing from the line, but he doesn't know how to apply them with the artistry to beat defenders. Like he doesn't get deep enough into the defender's body when he's pressing their leverage. So he's got the footwork, but not the understanding of how to apply it. The hand counters aren't as violent as they're going to need to be. Those things are correctable, but he's going to have to discover and work at it. The route breaks are going to have to be sharper. Because as we talked about with quarterbacking, you're going to have to get a half step on a defender to win. And some of these guys are going to cover you tight enough that you've got to be really sharp with your turns, really deep with your breaks, really tight with your footwork. And I don't think his footwork is as flat as it needs to be all the time with certain intermediate routes. And so he's on his way, but he's not quite there considering the rest of this class. And let's keep that in mind. Because if this were a different class, like say, last year's class, not Xavier Worthy, AD Mitchell would have been my number 4, probably would have been my number 4 or number 5 wide receiver on the board with an instant starter grade. And this class, he's like chopped liver compared to those guys, apparently. So,
okay. Yeah, it's just a deep class. That's how it goes. Yeah. And again, I know you've given us a lot of time, Matt, so I don't want to, but I got one more I got to ask.
Please.
Okay. I need to get your evaluation on, and this is just because you're a Georgia guy. I need to get your evaluation on Brock Bowers. As far as let's not look at it necessarily like for the Giants. Let's just look at it like this type of prospect. Where do you see his value falling? Like how high is his ceiling? What's his floor? What's his middle ground? And then where would you be comfortable selecting a player like this if you're an NFL GM?
Yeah. And while I definitely am a Georgia grad and I worked next to that institution for about 14 years before I worked for it for 10. And I did cover the football team for all of a month, about 3 months back in the Garrison Hurst, Terrell Davis days.
Garrison Hurst.
Yeah. But really, not a huge college football fan. So if I was, I'd be rooting for the Miami Hurricanes.
Okay.
Because that's where I first went to school. But with that said, Brock Bowers is, to me, if Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid were the two guys that I thought had a chance to knock on Mike Ditka's rookie production record at tight end as rookies. And certainly, Laporta nearly let himself in the door. He got the door to unlock. He just didn't get in before Ditka slammed it back shut. I would say that Brock Bowers has a chance to break down the door.
Wow.
And it's not because he's an all-around great tight end. He's an all-around great wide receiver in a tight end's build, who can win deep. Like, he has reacceleration. I mean, I'm talking like running back, wide receiver level reacceleration, that you outrun cornerbacks on the same side of the field as you. And you just look at that and start giggling like a schoolgirl because you're as a scout, because you're like, I don't see this every day. I'm talking like Vernon Davis-esque echoes of Vernon Davis, or the guy, we have to compartmentalize when we talk about him, but Aaron Hernandez, who was a special athlete and a versatile player, who just, unfortunately was the human being he was and had the troubles he did. And what he did was, deplorable. So when we look at, but as a player, he was a fantastic football player.
Right.
And I think that Brock Bowers should probably be deployed in those fashions. Kind of Vernon Davis-esque, Aaron Hernandez, where he's a move tight end who can occasionally do some backside blocking or double teaming or quick hitting blocks on the front side, where you get good position, you get a nice little bit of movement early because of your technique, and then you just release and get the heck out of there, because that's about all he's going to do with that size. Yeah. But as a route runner, you can match him up inside, outside. You can put him on the wing. You can put him as a back out of the backfield and get some defenses to think, because you could hand him the ball and he could make some plays on certain schemed plays. And defenses now go, we got to watch for that. And then the thing that they were really doing to set up is now a step wide open, because the linebacker had to think about something that he didn't before. So he gives you all that plus the deep game. So for me, would I draft him as a top 5 prospect? Absolutely, if I knew exactly how I was going to use him in those fashions, and I had surrounding talent where he's a final piece to the puzzle to make my team unstoppable on offense. If I'm a team that, if I'm the Minnesota Vikings and I didn't have, Hawkinson, and I looked at my defense, and last year, say it was last year, and Brock Bowers was coming out, they would be the type of team where I would go, look, our defense is going to stink. We got Flores to try and shore up schematically the best he can do to do his magic, but we know we're not going to be good there. The only way we're going to win is outscore people. Let's go get a guy to pad a strength even more. And that's what they did with Hawkinson, like a couple of years prior, but I think that that's what they would have done with Bowers if they didn't have a player like that. So look for a team that is either going to build around him and has at least one really strong receiver, or a team that's in contention for their offense only and is like, we're going to stockpile and give ourselves so many weapons that teams are going to have nightmares about us.
Who doesn't sound like a team like that? The Giants. It's almost the polar opposite of what you just described. So I guess maybe for Giants fans, the takeaway there is probably don't get caught up on dreaming about Brock Bowers in this offense. But we'll see what happens there. Maybe they trade down. Who knows? Yeah. But anyway, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was unbelievable. The fans are going to love it. I really appreciate it. One more time before we go, though, let everybody know where they can find the RSP and maybe where they can find you on social media as well.
Yeah. MattWaldman.com is where you can find the RSP. $21.95 pre-draft, post-draft package. You pay for it through PayPal, and then it redirects you to the page and you download. It's pretty simple to go through. I have 2 sites that I do stuff with, because I grew kind of organically in doing all this. So it's not too hard, but I'm sure if you're a Zoomer, or you're my daughter's age, you might go, this offends my sensibilities of what web stuff is, and I understand, we're working on it, but it's not bad. You'll work through it fine. Lots of people have and don't have an issue, and if you do, give me a call. But you can find me on YouTube at Matt Waldman RSP's Film Room. You can find me on Twitter at Matt Waldman, where I do a lot of video breakdowns. If you want to find a player at those 4 positions, type in, Michael Penix Jr. at Matt Waldman in the search bar on X, and you'll probably find all my videos there that I did on him.
Just to give a small correction, the best way to find it is you type from : then Matt Waldman. And
thank you. Even better. See, thank you. I'm an X. What do you want me to tell you?
Freaking X. All right. Anyway, Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. I don't care what anybody says. Yeah. But anyway, thank you so much, Matt. For everybody else listening in, have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon.
See you, Matt.